Does it taste great? Yeah. Was it a good use of time? Definitely not. Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today I'm going to be attempting gourmet Kit Kats from the Bon Appetit series Gourmet Makes. If you're new to the channel, I've done a few of these in the past, so you can check those out here. I do Bon Appetit recipe tests every single Wednesday, so if you like this one, be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. All right, without any further ado, let's see how this goes. Ingredient quantities and a full written recipe are in the description box below. The recipe said to use a food processor. If you've been around for a while, you know that I don't have one, so I'm just combining the dry ingredients in the jug of my blender, and then giving it a quick pulse to combine before streaming in my wet ingredients. So you can see here that it looks like the dough was kind of coming together and maybe getting beat up and worked a little bit too much in the blender jug. So I observed that the texture of the dough was a little bit pully and looked like maybe there was too much gluten development. But nevertheless, I decided to cook the dough and just see how it turned out. Since Claire didn't specify how to cook this, I'm following the instructions that came with the waffle cone maker, so 1/3 of a cup cooked for about 2 minutes. You can see that the wafers are really uneven. There's one side that's thin, one side that's thick. Overall, I just really wasn't happy with how this looked, so I decided to make the dough again, this time using my pastry cutter. So it's all the same ingredients. I combined all the wet into one measuring jug just to make it easier to stream through, and just really trying to get all of the liquid incorporated into the dough, trying to be mindful to not overwork it and develop all that gluten. I used the exact same cooking method, but the wafers were much more uniform in thickness this go round. Next, I'm just trimming the wafers to the width of my chocolate molds. So my molds were 4.5 centimeters wide, so I was able to get a couple strips out of each of the wafers, but your mileage may vary depending what your chocolate molds look like. So the recipe didn't specify how long to bake the wafers. I found that about 15 minutes did the job for me. Once the wafers are out of the oven and fully cooled, you want to take any of the broken fragment pieces and just kind of mash those into a really fine powder using your rolling pin. So now I can work on the filling for the Kit Kats. So the recipe didn't give quantities for the dark chocolate or for the amount of crumbs to add, so I found that this 1:2 ratio gave me a pretty gritty texture that was still spreadable and tasted good. With all of the components prepared, it's just a matter of assembling the Kit Kats. So it's alternating layers of wafers and melted chocolate, so it's super straightforward. I'm not going to bore you with the full detail here, but it goes by pretty quickly. Once you have these fully built up, you just want to wrap them in some cling film as tightly as possible. I did it maybe a little bit too tightly and actually cracked some of the wafers. And then you want to put that into a pan and top it with something heavy to hold it down. I used a box of chicken stock, but you could use cans or whatever you have on hand. So after about 30 minutes, the chocolate filling is pretty set up and these are holding together on their own. So I grabbed a serrated knife. I started off using I think it was a tomato knife. It had a little bit of a thicker blade, and I just sawed back and forth, trying to not put too much pressure on the wafers, and you can see that this just totally fell apart. So in the BA video, you could tell that Claire was a little bit exasperated by her yield continuing to decrease, and this was such a frustrating part of the project here to just see all of this work just crumbling to pieces before my eyes. So I switched knives to my bread knife, which is a much thinner bladed knife, and I put 0 downward pressure. It was exclusively the sawing action that guided the blade through the wafer, and I did have a better result doing that. Alright, so here we are again tempering chocolate. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I'm getting a little bit better at it actually, so that's something. I'm taking 3/4 of the chocolate to melt down, reserving 1/4 of the chocolate by weight to use as a seed, and then really just taking this through the appropriate temperatures based on the milk chocolate tempering temperatures. So it's not really difficult per se, it's just very specific and fussy. So once the chocolate is tempered, you do need to move kind of quickly here because it will start to set up very fast. So I started by just putting the chocolate into my pastry bag and then piping it into the bottom of my mold, knocking the mold against the counter just to release any air bubbles that might be underneath the surface, and then pressing the little wafer stacks one by one into the chocolate. So this part isn't really difficult, but it is really stressful because the clock is ticking once you put the chocolate down. So A lot of my wafers were a little bit lopsided or uneven within the mold just from my rushing to get through the process. So you can see here that my mold was a little bit too shallow to accommodate the wafers. So when you're looking for your mold, you want something that's probably about a 1/2 inch deep. Mine was a little bit less than a 1/4 inch deep, and it just wasn't enough. Even though this chocolate is tempered, I still put it in the refrigerator for about 10 minutes just to help it set up a little bit faster. You can see that when it released from the mold, some of the chocolate did come away from the tops, which gave me little bald spots on the top of my Kit Kats. Not the end of the world, it doesn't look so great though. To create the chocolate layer on the bottom of the Kit Kat, Claire piped the chocolate into the bottom of a loaf pan. I thought that using a large glass pan would allow me to see the depth of the chocolate better. However, my chocolate was so set up by the time I was reaching this point that I could barely get the wafers pressed into the chocolate, so it was really frustrating. The positive side was that since the chocolate was already set up, it was really easy to trim away from the Kit Kats and kind of clean up the bars rather than having to reheat my knife and slice things. So silver linings, I suppose. As a final experiment, I took the remaining tempered chocolate and just microwaved it for about 5 seconds on low power just to get it loosened up and pourable. I then poured it over the top of my Kit Kats just to see how it would impact the appearance and the taste of the bars. Alright, so yesterday this took me about 6.5 to 7 hours to complete the Kit Kats. So by the time I was wrapping it up, it was already almost midnight. So it is Sunday, I'm well rested. I am very excited to taste these Kit Kats and see how everything kind of came together. So appearance-wise, I have 2 different versions. This is the version closest to what Claire did. You can see that my chocolate kind of came off the top as I was unmolding. The second option looks a little bit more like a Twix bar. So let's see if it snaps. Not really. The wafer layer is really crunchy, really noticeable. It's not kind of like puffy and airy. So let's compare that to the version with the chocolate poured over the top. Much more of a snap, so it's a thicker layer of chocolate. Give this a little bite and see. Obviously, my homemade gourmet Kit Kats don't really look too similar to the store-bought version. However, I do think that my result was pretty close to what Claire had, and I think if I did this again, I would nail it. So I'm gonna give appearance a win. Taking appearance out of the equation though, because I think the most important thing with the Gourmet Make series is the taste. The taste of this is not a Kit Kat. Just like I said in the Oreo cookie video, this is kind of reminiscent of a Kit Kat, but it's definitely not a Kit Kat. Does it taste great? Yeah. Was it a good use of time? Definitely not. To get my 3 Kit Kat bars took me close to 7 hours and about $30 to $40 in ingredients, so not really an efficient way to enjoy Kit Kats. So I would not recommend you give this a try, but if you do, I hope this was helpful. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.